Imagine sending one of the world's largest armies into a neighboring country, armed with tanks, helicopter gunships, fighter jets, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Now imagine losing, not because your enemy had a bigger army, but because they knew the mountains better than you did. The Soviet Union expected to restore order in Afghanistan within months. Instead, it became trapped in a brutal 10-year war that helped change the course of world history. Most people call it Russia's Vietnam. But here's the twist. The Soviet Union wasn't defeated by one battle, one general, or even one army. It was defeated by geography, politics, and a conflict that kept growing larger than anyone expected. To understand why, we need to go back to the Cold War. By the late 1970s, the Soviet Union stood as one of two global superpowers. Across Europe and Asia, communist governments either belonged to Moscow's sphere of influence or depended upon Soviet support. Afghanistan sat directly on the Soviet Union's southern border. It wasn't rich, it wasn't industrialized, but its location made it strategically priceless. To the south lay Pakistan. Beyond that, the Indian Ocean. To the west was Iran, where the Islamic Revolution had just overthrown the Shah in 1979. The Kremlin feared instability spreading toward its own Central Asian republics. The real reason Soviet leaders became so concerned wasn't simply Afghanistan itself. It was what Afghanistan bordered. Then, events inside Afghanistan took an unexpected turn. In April 1978, a communist political party known as the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan seized power in what became known as the Sour Revolution. The new government immediately launched sweeping reforms. Land ownership was redistributed, women's education expanded, religious influence was reduced. On paper, many reforms looked modern, but Afghanistan was and remains a deeply traditional society. In many rural villages, these changes were viewed as attacks on religion, tribal authority, and centuries-old customs. Rebellion spread rapidly across the countryside. The communist government struggled to survive. Again and again, Afghan leaders asked Moscow for military assistance. At first, Soviet leaders hesitated. They understood Afghanistan's history. For centuries, outside empires had entered the country believing victory would be easy. Few had left on their own terms. But in December 1979, Soviet leaders made the decision that would define an entire generation. Thousands of Soviet troops crossed the border. Special forces stormed the presidential palace in Kabul. Afghan leader Hafizullah Amin was killed. A new Soviet-backed leader, Babrak Karmal, was installed. The Kremlin believed the intervention would stabilize Afghanistan in a matter of months. Instead, it had walked into one of history's most unforgiving battlefields. Most people don't realize Afghanistan's greatest defense has never been its army. It's its geography. Look at a map. The country is dominated by the Hindu Kush mountain range. Towering peaks divide narrow valleys. Roads twist through steep passes. Entire communities remain isolated for much of the year. For conventional armies, this terrain is a nightmare. Heavy tanks struggle. Supply convoys become vulnerable. Aircraft can dominate the skies, but controlling mountains is another matter entirely. The Soviet army quickly occupied major cities. It secured airports, military bases, government buildings. But beyond those cities, another war was unfolding. Small groups of Afghan resistance fighters, the Mujahideen, began attacking Soviet patrols. Rather than fight directly, they disappeared into caves, villages, and mountain valleys. By the time Soviet reinforcements arrived, the attackers had vanished. The Soviet military possessed some of the world's most advanced weapons. The Mujahideen possessed something just as powerful: time. This is where the conflict became something much larger. The Soviet invasion alarmed much of the world. The United States saw an opportunity to weaken its Cold War rival without confronting it directly. Through one of the CIA's largest covert operations, Operation Cyclone, billions of dollars worth of weapons and support flowed to the Afghan resistance. Pakistan became the main gateway. Saudi Arabia contributed enormous financial backing. China also supplied weapons. Afghanistan had become one of the Cold War's biggest proxy wars. The Soviets weren't simply fighting Afghan rebels anymore. They were fighting an enemy increasingly supported by half the world. But here's the twist. Even with all that support, one weapon changed the war more than any other. For years, Soviet helicopters dominated the battlefield. The Mi-24 Hind helicopter became one of the most feared aircraft in Afghanistan. It could transport troops, launch rockets, and provide devastating firepower against mountain villages. Then in 1986, the United States supplied the Mujahideen with FIM-92 Stinger missiles. Suddenly, a single fighter hiding on a mountainside could shoot down a helicopter worth millions. Soviet pilots could no longer fly with confidence. Air superiority, the Soviet military's greatest advantage, began to disappear. The balance of the war shifted. Meanwhile, back inside the Soviet Union, public opinion was changing. Official newspapers continued reporting victories, but families kept receiving coffins. Nearly 620,000 Soviet personnel served in Afghanistan during the war. Around 15,000 Soviet soldiers were killed. More than 53,000 were wounded. Thousands more returned carrying invisible scars. The economic cost continued rising. The political cost grew even faster. This is where it gets strange. The Soviet military rarely lost control of Afghanistan's largest cities, yet it could never truly control the countryside. Every road required protection, every convoy risked ambush, every victory seemed temporary. The longer the war lasted, the harder it became to explain why it continued. When Mikhail Gorbachev became Soviet leader in 1985, he inherited a conflict with no obvious military solution. He famously described Afghanistan as a bleeding wound. Negotiations began. Finally, on February 15, 1989, the last Soviet troops crossed the Friendship Bridge back into the Soviet Union. The war was over. But Afghanistan's suffering was far from finished. An estimated 1 to 3 million Afghan civilians had died. Millions more became refugees, fleeing to Pakistan and Iran. Entire villages had been destroyed. Infrastructure lay in ruins. After the Soviet withdrawal, rival Afghan factions turned their weapons against each other. Civil war followed. From that instability emerged a new movement, the Taliban, which took control of most of the country during the 1990s. And after the attacks of September 11, 2001, Afghanistan would once again become the focus of another superpower intervention. Most people don't realize that two very different global powers entered Afghanistan decades apart, with remarkably similar expectations. Both believed advanced technology would overcome geography. Both expected relatively quick victories. Both discovered that winning battles is not the same as winning a war. That's why the Soviet-Afghan War still matters today. It wasn't simply another Cold War conflict. It reshaped Afghanistan for generations. It exposed the limits of military power. It weakened confidence in the Soviet government at home and added to the political and economic pressures that contributed to the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. Perhaps its greatest lesson is one history keeps repeating. Maps can show borders. They can show mountains, they can even show military advances. But they cannot measure the determination of people defending their homeland. Sometimes the strongest army in the world isn't defeated by a more powerful enemy. Sometimes it's defeated by a country that refuses to surrender, and by mountains that never take sides. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button so that other people can see it. See you in the next video.